My name is Vanessa. I'm 32, and until last week, I worked as the head of procurement at Sterling Industries, a company that prides itself on being a leader in industrial manufacturing. It's one of those places where you walk into the office every morning and feel like you're part of something big, something important. At least, that's how it used to feel for me. Not anymore. Now, when I think about Sterling, all I can see is betrayal wrapped up in a shiny corporate bow. I've been with the company for 8 years. 8 long years of late nights, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and more spreadsheets than anyone should ever have to look at in their lifetime. But I didn't mind because I believed in what we were doing. We supplied critical materials to other businesses, parts they needed to keep running. And my job was to make sure we got them from the right suppliers at the best prices. Over time, I built relationships with some of the most reliable vendors out there. One supplier in particular became our lifeline, Apex Solutions. They weren't just good, they were exceptional. And if I do say so myself, I played a huge role in making that partnership work. But none of that mattered. Not the years of hard work, not the trust I'd earned from colleagues, not even the glowing performance reviews I received year after year, when my boss's son walked into my life like he owned the place. Because, well, technically he did. His name is Carter Sterling, and let me tell you, he's everything you imagine when you picture the spoiled heir to a family business. He's handsome in that polished, expensive suit kind of way, but his charm doesn't extend beyond surface-level pleasantries. Beneath the tailored clothes and perfectly styled hair lies someone who thinks the world owes him everything simply because his last name is Sterling. When he joined the company 6 months ago, fresh off an MBA program no one had heard of, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, nepotism isn't exactly uncommon in this industry. Maybe he'd surprise us. Maybe he'd bring fresh ideas to the table. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Carter started small, poking his nose into departments that had nothing to do with him, offering unsolicited advice during meetings, and generally acting like he knew better than people who'd been here twice as long as he'd been alive. But things really went south when he decided to restructure procurement. That's corporate speak for, let's fire half the team and replace them with cheaper labor. His plan wasn't just short-sighted, it was reckless. I tried to explain this to him multiple times, but he wouldn't listen. To him, I was just another cog in the machine, easily replaced. And then came the day I'll never forget. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was sitting in my office reviewing contracts when Carter barged in without knocking. He didn't even bother to sit down. Instead, he stood in front of my desk, arms crossed, looking down at me like I was some kind of insect beneath his shoe. "Vanessa," he said, dragging out my name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow. "About?" "You're fired." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind scrambled to process what he just said. Fired? Me. The person who'd spent nearly a decade building this department from the ground up? "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "You heard me," he replied, smirking like he'd just delivered the punchline to a joke only he understood. "You're dead weight, always clinging to old-school methods, refusing to adapt. Honestly, I'm surprised you lasted this long." Dead weight. The phrase echoed in my head, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Dead weight. As if all my hard work meant nothing. As if I hadn't poured my heart and soul into this company. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers. But instead, I sat there, frozen, watching as he dropped a severance package on my desk like it was some kind of consolation prize. "There's your payout," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Take it and go quietly, or I'll make sure you don't get a reference anywhere else. Your choice." He turned and walked out of my office, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the crushing weight of his words. For the first time in years, I felt completely powerless, humiliated, betrayed. The days that followed were a blur. I packed up my things in silence, avoiding eye contact with coworkers who either pitted me or whispered behind my back. Some tried to offer comforting words, but none of it made a difference. What stung the most wasn't losing my job, it was losing my identity. For so long, I defined myself by my career, by the value I brought to Sterling Industries. Without that, who was I? But anger has a funny way of creeping in when you least expect it. At first, It simmered quietly in the background, fueling sleepless nights and restless days. Then it grew louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. How dare Carter treat me like I was expendable? How dare he dismiss everything I'd done for the company as outdated and irrelevant? And how dare he think he could get away with it? That's when the idea came to me. It started as a fleeting thought, a spark of rebellion that flared to life in the darkest corners of my mind. But the more I considered it, the more it took shape, growing into something tangible, something real, something dangerous. Apex Solutions, the supplier I'd worked so closely with over the years, the one that Sterling relied on for nearly 70% of its operations. If Carter thought I was dead weight, maybe it was time to show him just how heavy I could be. Buying shares in Apex wasn't going to be easy. The severance package Carter had thrown at me was generous enough to cover basic living expenses for a while, but it wasn't nearly enough to buy a controlling stake in a major supplier. So I dug deeper, liquidating savings accounts, cashing out investments, and taking out loans against assets I'd spent years building. Every decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but I didn't care. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about proving a point. To Carter, to myself, to everyone who doubted me. When I finally approached Apex's board of directors with my proposal, they were skeptical, to say the least. Why would someone like me, a former procurement manager with no experience in ownership, want to invest such a significant amount of money in their company? But I had done my homework. I knew their numbers inside and out. I knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and exactly how much Sterling depended on them. By the time I finished presenting my case, they were convinced. Within weeks, I owned 55% of Apex Solutions. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can't help but smile. This isn't just revenge, it's strategy. With control over Apex, I hold the keys to Sterling's kingdom. If Carter wants to play dirty, fine. But he's about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of his life. Of course, this is only the beginning. There's still so much to do, so many pieces to move into place before I can truly turn the tables. But for the first time in months, I feel alive. Focused. Powerful. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. Carter Sterling hasn't seen anything yet. The first thing I did after securing my stake in Apex was to call an emergency meeting with their executive team. It wasn't just a formality, it was a power play. Walking into that boardroom, I wanted them to see me not as the procurement manager they'd worked with for years, but as the majority shareholder who now called the shots. The air was thick with tension as I took my seat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and financial advisors I'd hired specifically for this moment. "Thank you all for coming," I began, letting my gaze sweep across the room. "As you know, I've recently acquired a controlling interest in Apex Solutions. My goal isn't to disrupt what's already working. Apex is a cornerstone of this industry, and your reputation speaks for itself. However, there are opportunities here that we haven't fully explored yet. Opportunities that will benefit both our company and our clients." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in before continuing. "Sterling Industries has been one of our largest customers for years. They rely on us heavily, perhaps too heavily. And while I have no intention of cutting them off entirely, it's time we renegotiate the terms of our partnership. Starting today, prices go up by 15%, effective immediately." There were murmurs around the table, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging cautious glances. One of the senior executives, a man named Greg, leaned forward. "Vanessa, forgive me, but Sterling isn't going to take kindly to this. You're essentially declaring war." "That's exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice steady. "But trust me when I say this. Carter Sterling doesn't understand supply chains like we do. He won't see it coming. And even if he does, he won't be able to stop it." Greg hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll make it happen. But you realize this could escalate quickly." "It already has," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. "Let him come at me. I'm ready." The next morning, I received the email I'd been waiting for. It was from Sterling's legal department, sent directly to Apex's corporate office, and CC'd to me personally. The subject line read, "Urgent, breach of contract concerns." I opened it with a sense of satisfaction bordering on glee. Predictably, the email accused Apex of violating the terms of our long-standing agreement by raising prices without prior notice. It demanded an explanation and threatened litigation if the issue wasn't resolved within 48 hours. As I read through the dry legalese, I couldn't help but laugh. This was Carter's idea of a counterattack? A strongly worded email? Still, I knew better than to underestimate him completely. For all his arrogance, he wasn't stupid. Beneath the bluster, he had access to resources I didn't. Resources that could make life difficult if he decided to dig in his heels. So, I responded promptly, keeping my tone professional but firm. "Dear Mr. Sterling," I wrote, deliberately using his surname to emphasize the shift in our dynamic. "I appreciate your concern regarding the recent adjustments to pricing. However, I must clarify that these changes reflect current market conditions and operational costs. Apex remains committed to providing high-quality products and services, and we believe these updated terms will ensure a mutually beneficial relationship moving forward. Please feel free to reach out should you wish to discuss further." I hit send and sat back, imagining the look on Carter's face when he realized I'd signed off on the response myself. Let him stew over that for a while. Over the next few days, the pressure mounted. Sterling scrambled to find alternative suppliers, but it quickly became apparent that none could match Apex's quality or capacity. Their production schedules started slipping, orders were delayed, and clients began complaining loudly. Meanwhile, I made sure to keep tabs on everything through discreet channels. Old contacts within Sterling leaked tidbits of information about internal chaos, heated arguments between Carter and other executives, frantic attempts to secure backup vendors, and mounting frustration among employees who were forced to pick up the slack. But the real coup de grace came when I decided to visit Sterling headquarters under the guise of a routine supplier review. Technically, I still represented Apex, at least officially, and Carter had no choice but to let me in. Dressed in a sleek navy suit with heels that clicked ominously against the marble floors, I strode into the building like I owned the place. Because in a way I did. Carter was waiting for me in the conference room, his jaw clenched and his posture rigid. He looked younger, somehow less polished, as though the stress of the past week had aged him in reverse. When I entered, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "I'm here to discuss how we can move forward," I said smoothly, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. Clearly, there's been some misunderstanding. I thought it would be best to address it face to face. "Misunderstanding," he spat. "You think jacking up prices and holding us hostage is a misunderstanding?" "No," I corrected him, leaning back in my chair. "That's business. Something you might want to learn more about before making decisions that affect everyone else." His face flushed red, and for a moment I thought he might lose control entirely. But instead he forced himself to sit down, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "Fine," he ground out. "What do you want?" "Ah, now we're getting somewhere." I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. "First, I want an apology. Publicly issued, acknowledging the value Apex brings to Sterling Industries. Second, I expect a renegotiation of our contract, not just for price adjustments, but for long-term commitments that reflect the importance of our partnership. And third," I paused, letting the anticipation build. "Third, I want you to admit that firing me was the biggest mistake of your career." For a long moment, Carter stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "You really think you've won, don't you?" he said, shaking his head. "This little game of yours, it's not over yet, Vanessa. Not by a long shot." "Oh, I know it's not over," I replied, rising to my feet. "But trust me, Carter, when it is, you'll wish you'd never crossed me." And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving him seething in my wake. Back at Apex, I poured every ounce of energy into solidifying my position. I met with key stakeholders, streamlined operations, and even began exploring new markets to diversify our client base. The goal wasn't just to cripple Sterling. It was to build something stronger, something unshakable, something Carter could never touch. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't give up easily. Men like him never did. There would be lawsuits, smear campaigns, maybe even attempts to buy me out. Whatever came next, I had to be prepared. So I waited, and planned, and bided my time. Because revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about striking fast. It was about striking smart. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Carter didn't waste any time retaliating, as I'd expected. Sterling filed a lawsuit against Apex, accusing us of breach of contract and monopolistic practices. The media latched onto the story, painting me as everything from a corporate villain to an underdog hero. Meanwhile, Carter launched a PR campaign aimed at discrediting me personally, dredging up old rumors and half-truths in an attempt to tarnish my reputation. But I was ready for him. I'd spent months preparing for this exact scenario, working with top-tier lawyers, financial analysts, and communications experts. Every accusation thrown our way was met with irrefutable evidence, proving that Apex's price increases were justified by market trends and operational costs. And when it came to the personal attacks, I countered with transparency, releasing detailed reports showcasing my contributions to both Apex and Sterling over the years. Slowly but surely, public opinion began to shift in my favor. Carter's desperation became increasingly apparent. He started making reckless decisions, cutting corners in production to save money, and alienating key clients in the process. Employees grew restless, morale plummeted, and whispers of dissent spread throughout the company. It wasn't long before members of Sterling's board of directors approached me directly, expressing concerns about Carter's leadership and hinting at their willingness to consider alternatives. It was during one of these covert meetings that I received an unexpected proposal. They wanted me to return to Sterling, not as head of procurement, but as CEO. At first, I laughed it off. After everything Carter had put me through, the idea of stepping back into that toxic environment felt absurd. But then I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding, about creating a better future for myself, for Apex, and for everyone who had ever been mistreated by someone like Carter. The transition wasn't easy. Negotiations with Sterling's board dragged on for weeks, filled with tense discussions and last-minute demands. Carter fought tooth and nail to keep his position, even going so far as to threaten legal action against the board if they removed him. But in the end, his resistance only sealed his fate. When the final vote came down, the decision was unanimous. Carter would step aside, and I would take over as CEO of Sterling Industries. Walking into the building on my first day back felt surreal. Employees lined the halls, clapping and cheering as I made my way to the executive suite. Some faces were familiar, others new, but the overwhelming sense of support was undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged here, not because of what I did, but because of who I was. My first order of business as CEO was to implement sweeping reforms across the company. I restructured departments to prioritize collaboration over competition, invested in employee training programs, and established partnerships with suppliers based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Under my leadership, Sterling flourished, regaining its status as an industry leader while fostering a culture of innovation and inclusivity. As for Carter, he disappeared from the corporate world almost entirely. Rumor had it he moved overseas, attempting to start fresh in industries where his name carried less baggage. Whether he succeeded or failed, I didn't care. What mattered was that he was no longer in a position to hurt anyone else. Years later, as I stood on the balcony of Sterling's headquarters overlooking the city skyline, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been long and arduous, marked by pain, betrayal, and countless sleepless nights. But it had also been transformative, a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of turning adversity into opportunity. Apex Solutions continued to thrive under my ownership, serving not only Sterling but a growing list of satisfied clients worldwide. Together, we formed a partnership built on trust, integrity, and shared success, a stark contrast to the cutthroat tactics that once defined our relationship. And me? I finally found peace, not just in my career, but in myself. I learned that true strength isn't about tearing others down. It's about lifting people up, about using your power to create change, inspire growth, and leave the world a little better than you found it. That night, as I left the office and stepped into the cool evening air, I smiled. My story wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I was proud of every chapter.